what you see on the screen is today's agenda. We're going to cover Nettitude quite quickly. For those that aren't familiar, we are. I know Mark has covered it in a very high level. I'll go into a little bit more detail. And then we'll pass over to Charles to talk about a fictional case study around a travel firm and how they were impacted by third-party risk. And then we'll start to talk about things that you can do to address those risks of those third parties and of the supply chain. So next slide, please. So as Mark said, Nettitude, trusted leaders in cybersecurity, and we really hang our hat with Crest, right? The founder of Nettitude over 20 years ago, Roland Johnson, has just been re-elected Crest president for the second time. So Crest provide customers assurance that Nettitude can deliver the services that we deliver to a very high standard, whether that be pen testing, instant response, or our managed security services. Some of the things that set us apart include things like our research and innovation team, where we have recently found zero-day vulnerabilities in Microsoft products, including their VPN stack. We've done lots of research into various innovative techniques around exploiting various technologies and systems. And that team continues to innovate and feed those innovations through to both our offensive side and our defensive side with the SOC. So we have a very highly credible set of teams within Nettitude, able to deliver a very, very wide breadth of services like GRC, like pen testing, like red teaming, like the SOC, like incident response, virtual CISO, and all the other things that we can do. So please reach out to us if you've got any requirements in those areas outside of this webinar. So I will now hand over to Charles to talk about the fictional case study.
Thank you, Mike. Hi, I'm Charles Hunter. I work with the GRC team. And any of the people that have been to our seminars before know that these follow a similar pattern. What we try and do is put you in the middle of an incident or give you a case study just to illustrate this, rather than just a series of slides going through the services. What we actually wanted to show you is what happened, what state the company was in, what happened, and what can be done in order to remediate that. So obviously we talk about the four. I'm going to talk about four from a perspective, from a GRC perspective. Then I'm going to hand to Mike, and Mike's going to talk from a SOC point of view. And then lastly, Asad's going to talk from a pen testing point of view. So there's going to be lots of different ways that you can address this. So it's not just limited to four. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Mondale Travel, a totally fictitious company. We have done our research. There is no Mondale Travel, so everything's fine there. But what I wanted to do was give you an idea of what this company is like. It's not what we're not going to do is give you a company that hasn't thought about certain things. What we want to show you is you can be of a high level of maturity and still be susceptible to links should one thing fail. So this company that we've invented, founded in 1993, obviously grown very fast because they're number 9 in the UK travel agency sector. The way that they're working wouldn't be relevant in this, but they are working in a hybrid way. Obviously, we wanted to give as detailed as possible as we could. But with the 400 employees working that way, that's just a size of the company that I wanted to just put out there to illustrate probably that final point when I get to it. But they're quite unique in the sense that they have a dedicated spend on cybersecurity. They spend 15%. So this was agreed by the board. Certain priorities were decided at the board level that they wanted to go for certain certifications. So they do hold Cyber Essentials Plus. They work quite hard in order to get that. And what they do is proactively run phishing simulations, because not only do they have a workforce, but of those 400 employees, there's a sizable amount of them that work in the call center. And what they wanted to do was test and keep testing and making sure that the security does run through the organization and it's done from board level, which is the most effective way to conduct security. However, in this particular instance, they only have one person that is running procurement, and there doesn't appear to be any internal support. We'll get to that in a moment. So there's a new direction for the company. So one of the things that they really wanted to do was increase the customer interaction. They wanted to be able to increase the satisfaction, get good satisfaction scores, good reviews on Trustpilot, on other verification services that perform that. But because they didn't have any internal assessment capability, and the fact that procurement's experience, of which was very little, the company, again fictitious by the way, we have checked, Chatty Chat, they were the company that won the tender. But they were mainly selected on price and functionality, not necessarily security. So already, before we've even hit the rest of it, and what actually happened, we're get to the point of taking that as internal assessment and the lack of it, and the procurement experience, just highlights that when you are performing things like this, it is at that level that you need to have expertise in, because it is looking at the company as a whole, asking the questions, performing the evaluations. That's how this is done. However, back to what they're implementing. So the chat function, again, needed to be in the main website via the API, no technical evaluation, because it wasn't seen like that, because there was no ability from a project management point of view to go, this is actually a major project. It is going to be an integration. It's been a significant integration that's going to impact us across the board. So I did paint the picture of Mondale spending a lot of money on security, but it really has to be spent in the right place, and you really have to have certain things in place, which we'll get to in a moment. But they've had a breach. Chatty Chat have had the breach, and it allowed the malicious actors into the system via the live chat. So what went wrong? In this particular case, there's no due diligence. The procurement team did a fantastic job on procurement, on actually the procurement of the things they needed for Mondale travel, items, devices, things that they need, but they weren't in a position to perform any due diligence. They didn't have a system in which they did that. Procurement would very much rely upon legal, and legal will think procurement's doing something. So each of the other teams might be thinking that the other one is covering it. And in that case, from a legal point of view, the contract never mentioned security responsibilities. So because they selected them on functionality and not security, you're into a position where, if we can all think back to March 2020, I think everyone in the world started using Zoom at the same time. So we did have a selection of tools. We had Teams, we had WebEx, we had Zoom, and we did have clients that were using Zoom and wanted a position on that. Now, Zoom is a good thing to raise because it's a very positive story. Just to illustrate this point, what Zoom did was they realized that they had a breach in 2019, and that they'd focused on scalability. What they hadn't thought about was security. Strangely, they started a 3-month program in January 2020 that was going to finish in April 2020, whereby they got 10 external CISOs, security officers, in order to evaluate all of their plans. So by the time it came to March, not only were they scalable, but they'd actually thought about that. But we did have a lot of calls from clients going, what is Netitude's position on this? And because we were able to anticipate that, we'd coordinated as teams, and we had a unified response. So that's just one thing to mention on that. Is, there's a high profile example of exactly what we're talking about here in a sort of functionality point of view. Mondale Travel are data controllers. They will be collecting data, and they will be using sub-processors, data processors. They might be using sub-processors under DPO, data protection language. You can achieve that very simply via an information sharing agreement. I'm not trying to introduce a solution right here, right now, because we'll get to those in a moment. But this is a very simple things that you can do. There are a lot of very easy things that you can put into place, and hopefully the things that I'll show you will be you'll be able to deploy, be able to discuss as a company, and be able to put in place. Chatty Chat didn't conduct any security testing, and nobody even challenged them. So all the resources went into functionality, no internal or external testing of the API, but more importantly, no monitoring of activity between between the API. So there was no technical monitoring. Now, this is a this is a website that we've credited there, and you can actually see probably a very familiar face right at the top, a familiar organisation with the NHS, where it does say not disclosed for now. It actually is disclosed now, because if you do go and visit that website and you do click on NHS, it was one of the IT providers that you can see here that was compromised, and it's the link to the BBC website, so it has actually been disclosed. So what I wanted to illustrate with this is there are companies like Black Kite that are going out and aggregating this data for you to be able to see, but you're the green, and on the right hand side is the company that you would be dealing with, and the problems are all different types of problems. You know, it could be the top one is a ransomware attack on the IT provider. The other ones can be all different types where risk hasn't been assessed, the company hasn't been assessed, and this just keeps populating itself. So I just wanted to highlight this. We could go into specific details, but I think what I wanted you to show you is that there's a lot of these. I just took a snapshot in between. There's a lot more Julys, there's a lot more Augusts, and so forth. But I just wanted to give you a familiar organisation in there. So with that in mind, so setting that scene, what 4 things do I need to do? Do you need to do in this situation? And some of these sound remarkably obvious, but honestly, when you bring them all together, you go, oh, right, okay, and now I see the flow between them. So you will see some of these slides, perhaps not flowing in a linear fashion, but honestly, it'll make sense by the time we got to the 4th one, I promise. The first one is take a look at your third parties and just perform that initial assessment. And that initial assessment could be, what are we doing? What are we sharing with them? What function do they provide? What access do they have? And start to think about it in a way, before you get to the risk assessments, which we'll talk about in a moment, start to think of them about what would be the impact if they had a breach. Now, obviously here, marketing information shared with an agency, at the point that you would share it with an agency, it probably would be secret, because it could be a marketing campaign, it could be a new service. So we would probably classify that as medium. But at some point, once it's obviously out there, it turns out to be, it wouldn't have such a high risk, because obviously it's a campaign that you'd like to go out with. And you can see the other examples of the loads there. It's basically, if they supply something but they don't manage the technologies, it's just a piece of software that they've given you, or a technology that they've given you, and you are managing it rather than third party. But if you look at the high-end criticals, if you're looking at people that are managing your e-commerce platform, again, if that's something that needs to be there, you're entirely right by looking at that, thinking, why didn't the web hosting company pick this up? Well, because the web hosting company haven't been evaluated in that way, because they've just made this list. So why didn't they pick it up? Because they didn't know that they had to check that. It wasn't part of the contract. It wasn't part of what it is that they needed to do. But if you look at the top one, if you're sharing personal information, you could go to a degree of personal information, and you could maybe put it in the medium. There might be a case to do. But if in doubt, always put it as high when you're dealing with data, and definitely put it as high if it's dealing with special category data, which is a high level and needs a high level of protection, and obviously payroll data as well. So I just wanted to set this slide, and I know it seems completely obvious, but this is one of those ones where I'd like you to go away and think, oh, that company, yeah, we do that with them, and maybe what would we classify them as? So obviously, I just wanted to set the scene with this particular slide. This may be obvious, but obviously with the dealings that we have, it's not as universal as you would think, is actually building a risk framework. It's fair to say that a lot of companies do deal with risk, but not a lot of them document it in that way, in the sense that it could withstand scrutiny, be able to be reused, be able to be used by anybody that picks up the framework and uses what has been designed. So these are the steps that you would expect with a risk framework. Choose however you would want to measure it. Red, amber, green, I put there. It could be 1 to 5, 1 to 3, however it is that you want to do. But you need to decide as an organization what works for you. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't make it, if it needs complication, you'll know, because you'll be that size of a company. You'll see that the types of risks that you have. These are the sorts of things that you would have internal conversations about. Once you've done that, identify those risks and see what that means to you. What are you again? What are you sharing with the company? What is the risk of that information? And using that as the basis to form the cybersecurity risk register. And I have made it separate here because most organizations have one risk register. Because I'm going to be talking in the next slide about an evaluation team. I'm going to be looking at creating that cybersecurity risk register. Again, that's something that we can assist with. But again, companies might feel that they're absolutely fine once they've selected the framework and they're using this. It has to be repeatable. It has to be able to be relevant. But if you put cybersecurity, security risks, information classification, any information management risks into a main risk register, there is experience enough to be able to say that some of those things can be lost because you're not dealing with it on a sort of granular specific level. Number 4, the next bit is how you're going to treat the risks. So now that you've got them there detailed, you've seen what they are, you've analysed them, you put them there, what are you going to do with those risks? Are you going to reduce them? Are you going to transfer them? Are you going to outsource them to a third party? Are you going to get rid of them altogether? Are you going to accept the risk? These are the sorts of things that, again, you can do internally. Again, Netitude can help you with. And then formally review that risk treatment, risk register, and document the reviews. Have a regular, and that could mean different things to different organizations depending on the level of risks, but have a regular touch point of being able to look at those risks and address them. And then number 6, go back to number 2. Go back to that and continue to do that. This is a continuous process, but things can be missed. And if you have those regular sessions and then a main annual review, then it probably puts you in a lot better position. Then once you've done that, you have to build the third-party evaluation process, because at this point, and I know this is where I said some of the slides might be out, but if you have a framework that you can now use, and you've used and you are starting to analyze those risks, you need to know what they are. You need to now know what that third party not only performs for you, not only what you have internally assessed as risk, but now you need to know what they are like, what their attitude is to things. Do they have the relevant instructions? Let's go back to that point. As a data controller, have you told them how you'd expect any information that you send to be secured? Because in the event of an incident, you're going to have to be able to demonstrate that you have. So it's things like that the reason for building these things in the first place. If you've got existing skills within the business, form an evaluation team. I've just called it an evaluation team. It can be formed. It can be called anything. I've just put that as agnostic because it can mean many things to many different organisations. If you have that, and in this particular case, in the case of Mondale Travel, we do have procurement and we do have legal, and it would be really important, as you saw there, for those two departments to talk to each other. If you have audit, great, get audit in there. Have somebody that can run the group, deal with all the issues that come up from that, because they need to be in a position to make a considered opinion. That's why I picked procurement. I'm guessing they're going to have after that particular incident, they're going to expand the team, or they're going to skill up the team in some way. Legal or audit, these are the sorts of people that you would like running that particular evaluation process. Again, the people that are going to do the assessments are going to be the information security. They're going to be the data protection team, however your organization is structured. And that would be point 3. Again, we can run this for you. We have a lot of experience in running programs such as this. We can administer the program completely for you. We can advise you on the right way to do it. And then once you're happy with that, then it's a process, as I said at the start, that anybody can use within the organization. And then typically we could set one of these programs up, and then we could be the people that come in a year later and evaluate the risk register. So we don't have to be there every month, or we could be, depending on your requirements. And then the last one is, I know it says, you were just performing some assessments on that. You've now got all this data back. You've now got an evaluation team. You've now decided what your risk framework is. So now you've got to conduct those assessments. And this is where you can achieve it. And I've kept this completely agnostic as to the solution, because you have to develop a question set that's relevant to you. It's fine asking a vendor, do you have an information security policy, yes or no? And then question number 2 talks about something completely different. If you want to, depending on how robust you want that questionnaire to be, that question could be, do you have an information security policy, yes or no? Yes. Does it address the following areas? Access control, acceptable use, uh, you know, role-based physical security. Let's start talking about all the things that you would need to know. Now, again, we know how to run these programs, but you may have the internal knowledge that just needs a bit of help from us. And then we could come in and help you with that. But if you do this yourself, then you look at the difference between the medium and low and the critical and high, because that's the part of the review and feedback is the mediums and lows should be able to look after themselves in the sense of what solution you put in, be it a piece of software, some spreadsheet. Again, we could advise on that. If you put that in, it should be able to produce you a list where somebody can look at that and go, yeah, okay, I've got some more questions on that. I think we need to probe a little further on that particular issue. And then they can look at that in isolation. But when it comes to the critical and highs, you do need that extra step in there. Not only you're reviewing the evidence, but you're actually validating the responses. We call it show and tell. So show us the security policy, show us how it's covered. We have some areas that we need to discuss on that security policy, and that's very much how we would look at that. But I'm now going to pass you over to Mike now, who's going to look at it from the a more technical point of view. So he's going to look at it from the SOC. So hand it over to you, Mike.
Thank you very much, Charles. Yeah, so Charles has done a great job of setting up that case study, which is very useful for the purpose of this presentation. And I'm going to carry on using Mondale Travel and Chatty Chat as examples, because the chances are, when we're talking about monitoring third parties, people might be thinking, well, why do I want to do that? I've got a great relationship with my version of Chatty Chat, or you might have somebody helping you in other areas of the business, like cloud transformation, or somebody looking after your network systems, for example. So, and you'll probably have a great relationship with those teams. If they're all in the office, you'll probably sit down, have lunch together, build relationships like humans like to do. But actually, Charles touched on this earlier as well, their ability to protect themselves from cyber risks and cyber incidents may well be less than your own, because they may well be less focused on this. And perhaps some of the stuff that Charles has spoken about, their answers to the questionnaire, well, they're after the business, right? So maybe they're fudging some of those answers a little bit. You need to be able to evidence what they're doing, right? So you need to monitor their access into your environment like you would do your own employees. You'll hear lots over the last few years about insider threat and insider risk. You can count third-party suppliers within the same sort of risk bracket there. Because you know what, you may well have set up some temporary access for a third party to come in and maybe set up some servers in a cloud environment, and you've given them 3 months to do that because that's how long you expect the project to last for. But you know what, they actually go in and they change the expiry dates on those accounts for no good reason whatsoever. So you need to be monitoring an audit trail of their use. And if they have been breached, you need to be able to spot the different types of behavior that you will see through the links between your environment and your supplier's environment. You can Google various links. Charles has evidenced some on a previous slide, but personally, I remember one a few years ago where a retailer, pretty well known in the UK, they outsourced their warehousing management to a third party, and as third parties do, they brought their own IT into that warehouse and they plugged it into the network, which just happened to include the corporate network of the retailer. And you know what, that third party supplier had a breach, and that jumped into the retailers, and their breach became your problem. That's really what we're trying to prevent here. So enabling all that monitoring of that type of activity, human and machine, means that you can respond much faster to an incident, and time to response really matters. Next slide, please, Charles. Now, there's various tools that you can use to monitor your environment and the connection between your third party and your environment. Now, we love our acronyms in cybersecurity, SIEM, Security Incident and Events Management. Essentially, we're taking audit logs and we're looking for suspicious behavior in there, like attempting to elevate privileges on a non-admin account. That might be an account held by a third party. For example, we may well be taking logs in from data stores, so we can identify unusually large data transfers outside of the environment. EDR, endpoint detection and response. So we're looking for suspicious things happening on workstations, because a lot of the incidents start by human error. Typically, that human is going to be operating a workstation or a server. So what we can use an EDR tool to be able to look for suspicious behavior that a typical antivirus product might not be able to pick up. And then NDR, network detection response, we can again look for suspicious behavior on the network. And scanning is quite an interesting one from this point of view. Most people seem to have scanning under control these days, but unfortunately, this year I've had several conversations with customers that can't tell me how many assets they've got in their environment. They can't tell me what their third parties are spinning up in the cloud or on premise, because they've just said, we need this project completed. Just go away, architect it yourself and build it, but they're building it within the customer's own environment. You need to be able to control and evidence what they have built, because you need to add that to your asset inventory, and you also need to evidence the fact that they are patching it and looking after it in an appropriate manner, because if they're not, again, their behavior becomes your risk. So that was a very brief couple of slides around the different type of technologies you can use to monitor third-party suppliers. So I'm going to pass over to Assad now, who's going to be talking a little bit about pen testing.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, so I guess as the guys have said, right? So you as an organization, you could be Mondale Travel. You're doing your pen testing, your internal, external. You're doing your scanning. You're all over it, right? There's nothing that you're not doing in terms of cybersecurity, but you can't say the same about your suppliers. It's really bad to assume that they're doing the same, if not better than you. So it all boils down to the same thing, really. What's your entry points into your organization, either directly from your own infrastructure and your own resources, and now then also applying the same logic to your third parties as well, because it's no good saying that you're all secure, assume that your third party is secure as well, and there's something in there which allows the breach to happen. As an organization, any controls you put in have basically almost gone to waste, because you just allowed this really weak entry point here that you've completely overlooked. So what I want to do is go through some pen testing, scenarios where pen testing would fall in. So if you look at the first one, right, you've got external infrastructure testing. You might be working with somebody like a third-party vendor, and you're working on a project together. They might have a VPN access into a small infrastructure that you have in your environment, not necessarily access to your domain entirely, but there might just be something on your side which allows access. It could be file sharing, it could be resource sharing of any kind. There's just something within your environment. If someone is able to get into your environment from that perspective, it might mean that, well, they take some files from you, or if there's no segregation in place, then it might actually mean your entire domain gets compromised. So it's also very, very useful to ensure that you are testing the external infrastructure of your environment that the third party has access to. Now, this might be something that you're doing already. So you might do an external pen test and you've got IP addresses that you include. That might be the same IPs that your third parties connect to for remote working. It's just good to ensure that you don't overlook that. Now, the second example, probably a bit more relevant to our case study. So you've got Chatty Chat and you've got Mondale Travel. In this case, Chatty Chat have provided additional functionality for Mondale Travel to include in their website in the form of a live chatbot. There was no pen testing on the API. There was absolutely it was just an integration into the website. This is what we want. Our third-party vendor has created this for us. We're just going to put this on our website now, and it gives us what we need. If you're not doing any testing on the API, then it could be the case that some information gets taken from your API because you don't have any credentials on your API, you don't use any API tokens, or maybe the infrastructure of the API is not very secure. And now that's actually meant that your web server has been compromised. Now, you may have tested the web application yourself, biannually or annually, but because you put the API in there without being tested, now the entire web server and the web application is at risk of compromise just because you've overlooked this additional functionality. Now, we can go one step closer. Okay, you can do pen testing on the API itself, but what about source code reviews? Is the API functionality doing just what you want it to in terms of your business justification? Is there anything in the code which might mean that actually it's reaching a remote server out in wherever it is? It shouldn't be doing that, but unless you review the code, there's absolutely no way of you knowing what's going on in the background. So that's one important thing to bear in mind. This is where secure code reviews and vulnerability assessments against your code are very useful. Over to the next slide for some more examples. Okay, so this is quite an interesting one, actually, out of the examples that we have here on the slides. Social engineering. Now, you might be doing this against your employees, and you're doing your security awareness training. You're ensuring that your employees know exactly what they need to be doing in case they do receive a phishing email. But what about your third party? What if they don't have the budget for security awareness training? What if their employees that have joined the third party are not very tech savvy, just haven't had the support, and they end up clicking on a phishing email, the workstation gets compromised, and as a result, an attacker's now made your way to your organization. Now, it's quite easy for me to say, well, attacker could go into your organization. How it actually happens, that entirely depends on the integration you have within your environment from a third party. It could be a VPN connection. It could just be a portal where you share files and someone uploads something malicious, and someone from your side of the business, in this case, Mondale Travel, opens that file and it could infect your network. Another important one is cloud configuration and security testing. When cloud has sort of taken us over by storm and continues to just get bigger and bigger, there's many different ways in which you can have people or individuals work with you on projects. You could be sharing accounts. You could have a connection into your environment. You could be sharing permissions to allow people to reach different resources. Before you know it, there's so much integration, you lose control of what integration actually is, what access a third party has, and as a result, your cloud environment gets compromised. It could be a user account. It might not have to be infrastructure. As you know, it depends on what your business use case is. You don't necessarily need to have infrastructure in the cloud in order to have a cloud environment, and it gets really complicated. So therefore, it's very important to ensure you control your third party access. And last but not least, we've got internal infrastructure testing. So ransomware, right, that's been around for a very long time. Organizations are worried and don't want their organization to be ransomware. But what about third-party environments? It's no secret that ransomware makes its way through environments by going through network shares, compromising other network locations that it might be connected to. What about your third party? If they get compromised and then your network is connected in some way or form, then that ransomware is just going to make its way to your network. And if you don't have any segregation in place, then that ransomware is just going to continue to populate until your entire environment is entire environment is compromised, and at that point, you are having to deal with ransomware as well as your third party. So there's one to bear in mind as well. So when you do internal infrastructure testing, this is something that we can look out for and do tests on your behalf. We also have a ransomware resiliency program as well. So that's just a few examples of where pen testing would be useful and why it's actually a big problem.